Welcome to Impact SaaS Podcast, Zale. So lovely to have you on the show.
It's lovely to be here. I'm very excited about this.
We're talking all or everything related to vertical farming or local grown salad, as your brand is called. And we're going to
Mhm.
talk about the good, the bad, and the better, because you're going to tell us how you do it best. But before I do that, I'm very interested to know a little bit about where the idea was planted. I want to be full of puns.
Okay.
um, and who the main partners who you're working with and have been part of your journey and what's motivated you to get it started and keep going with it.
Okay. So I'll tell you the story and then I'll tell you the motivation. Okay. So the story was I was recently divorced and I had 5 kids.
Mm,
And my kids were teenagers. And while I'm not a health freak, I like to eat healthy, right? So I don't, and I was eating healthy and I had all these kids and I had 5 of them and they were all, the youngest was 8, the oldest was like 14, 15. And I lived a block and a half away from their mother. So we were going back and forth all the time. So feeding the kids and making sure there was a salad was always part of it. Okay, so it's like 3 things that happened all at once that made it all happen. The second thing, I was doing consulting in Canada. In Canada, there's a consulting called SRED, Scientific Research Experimental Development. And essentially, when you consult with a company that develops a new technology or overcomes a technical challenge, that company can get money from the government. It's very, very innovative in Canada. So I had a lot of
mm,
clients like that. And 2 clients were of interest to our story. One was a company that put air into water, and by putting air into water, they made things uh, grow much faster. It's called dissolved oxygen. But the technology isn't that important. But putting air into water makes everything grow much quicker. It makes plants grow quicker, makes vegetables grow quicker. And the guy there was telling me all about the money that could be made in vegetables and all the problems of vegetables. And remember, I'm shopping a lot because of my kids and feeding salads and everything else. It's like all spinning in my head. And then I had another client that was making sandwiches, and they were making like 3,000 sandwiches a day. So it turns out making sandwiches and making it that volume of sandwiches a day is a really complex business. And but there's a whole technical challenges in there. But what he was telling me was they couldn't always get all the vegetables he would make for his sandwiches. I mean, we're not talking peanut butter and jam. We're talking more high class sandwiches that were sold in hotels
mm.
and places like that. So big flavors. So he's telling me all about the problems of this. I'm dealing with my kids and feeding my kids. And then I'm dealing with this other guy telling me about the industry and how big the industry is. And then I was riding my bicycle and I'm looking around at the roofs of buildings. I'm saying, why is Canada importing 85% of its food when we could just be growing it on the tops of buildings, right? Enclosed. Sound
Yeah,
like a great idea, right? And then I started banging out the numbers, and it turns out that you can't make any money because you're only making a few dollars per square foot, which makes the business not make sense on the roofs of buildings. So I started saying, well, what happens if we could start stacking them? And that's how I got into the world of indoor vertical farming. And then I
mm.
started doing the numbers. I did the projections, which now comes to my motivations, because you can make a tremendous amount of money from food. Food is an amazingly big. So in the end, I got involved in it because I was thinking, I just started doing the numbers, and the numbers are just phenomenal. And the returns are phenomenal if you can grow a lot of volume per square foot. So which is really the driver of it. And later on, I think we'll probably get into the economics of it, and it's a little bit more complicated then. But that's how I
Mm.
got into it and why I'm. And it's a great business to be in. I mean, like you're feeding people, you're making people's lives better. So like, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so good to hear someone just being straight up front about it and be like, I'm in the business to make money. The person I interviewed last week, Roger Wade, was saying, I wish a lot more founders and startups just said that. And actually, the second part is that the purpose behind that is what's motivated you and what's
Yeah.
going to give you the legacy that you want to leave behind, essentially.
Yeah.
You sort of said a couple of things I want to pick up on. You said, that there was a lot of innovation grants that came through the Canadian government, and that's how you got exposed to this business. And you saw the opportunity, and there were two problems, basically scarcity and quality. You mentioned something about you said something about there's all the things that are wrong with the veg that we source. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit. I know we're going to come to scarcity in a minute and how the kind of stacking on top of this vertical farm idea comes to mind. But it kind of just thinking about it from like the quality, like the soil quality perspective and the modern farming methods and genetically modified fruit and veg as well. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And how does this particular solution actually give us the healthier alternative? Because that's what people are really focused on these days, their actual health and what they're putting in their bodies. Certainly I
Right.
am.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit. I want to deal with GMO first, because GMO is in reality, GMO really is only practically being used for corn and for wheat and corn and wheat type products, pulses. So when you
Okay.
eat your lettuce, you don't have to worry about GMO. There's a little bit of GMO stuff going on in tomatoes, but very rare. Most of it is just typical what they call hybrids, which are the mixing of, you take two types of vegetables, like a green, well, grapefruit is the prime example of hybrids. A grapefruit is really just an orange and a lemon that were grown together and grafted together and made a new plant. And there are many, many things that we eat that are like that. So in the world where I live, which is microgreens, small microgreens, herbs, small leafy greens, and small vegetables, GMOs are not even a concern. But back to the health issue. The second that you harvest something, which means you basically take your plant, let's just take a piece of lettuce, you cut the piece of lettuce off the plant out of the ground, it starts losing nutrients immediately. And so the real loss of vegetables is when it travels, the 1,500 miles it travels. And I will talk about this 1,500 miles from it has so many problems and creates so many problems in the world. It's phenomenal. You're from England. When it doesn't rain in Spain, you don't have any lettuce. When it doesn't rain in California, Canada doesn't have any lettuce. Very, very common. Rabobank has a map of how things travel around the world. It's a scary map. It's a really scary map of how food travels. Anyhow,
I can imagine.
Yeah. So the loss of the biggest damage and the loss of nutrients is when you cut the vegetable and the water seeps out, when the liquid seeps out of the vegetables. And then a lot of people do a lot of things to adjust against that, but that is the core problem. Anybody's had a garden in the backyard. Now, the last another piece of information, which is very, very critical, when you eat a vegetable and it's just full of flavor, that means it's full of nutrients. When it's not full of flavor, it's not full of nutrients. We all now know, taste the strawberry that looks beautiful, but there's no taste, there's no flavor. It feels like, right?
Yeah, they just taste almost, there's no taste there, but there's like a smell that's similar to how that fruit or vegetable should smell, but it's almost like they all taste the same. They all taste like a bit like ice water. Just
Yeah.
just really
It's
vanilla, if
right.
that's the right word to describe them.
Well,
And I
not
noticed
vanilla.
a difference.
I love vanilla flavor, so I wouldn't say it tastes
Yeah,
like that.
vanilla, not the flavor, but vanilla's in, yeah, like it's not
Cardboard.
giving
I
much.
would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you understand
cardboard.
what. But I did notice the difference actually, because like in the Levant, because you buy the fruit and veg off the markets and it's locally grown, it's just different. Like the tomatoes look different, they taste better. And like, yeah, I'm obsessed with the difference in the taste of tomato and cucumber versus what you get here in the UK versus Spain.
Right.
So that's a really good point because actually then, yeah, you're fixing a problem with the way it feels and tastes, and that's such a massive part of the experience. The nutritional value obviously is massively important, and so you're dealing with that kind of social aspect is better for people's health. but then there's the environmental, which is the transportation, the logistics, and they kind of go hand in hand. You know, it's not great for the quality, but it's also a disaster
So
for us environmentally.
to build on that, and just to like the hammer and the nail,
Yes,
really
do
deep.
it. Yes.
The product, the straw. Let's go back to the strawberry. The strawberry that is grown is actually grown so that it can travel that distance. And that's why the strawberry is grown on its beauty and on its ability to travel and not spoil. It's not grown on its taste or nutritional
Okay.
value. It's the same with
Ah,
all the vegetables.
okay.
If you were to go and look for strawberry variations or varieties, or there's cultivars as you call them in the industry, you'll find 50, 60, 100 different types of strawberries. When it comes to green basil, when I pick a green basil seed, I have 25 choices of a basil seed, and they're all slightly different. But in the world of food, the way food is now, and the movement of food and everything else, it's all built on can that plant, when it's harvested, last and look beautiful when it arrives.
Wow. So what it's done is essentially it's just made us into less sophisticated beings in terms of our taste buds and what we demand from food quality. And I think that's a massive shame because I'm a huge foodie. So yeah, okay, that I didn't know. And I love learning these new things.
So the other thing is that there's also pesticides and herbicides that are all put on all those
Yes.
vegetables to help them grow. And even organic farmers are using pesticides and herbicides, which are all going. So there's actually a fungicide too. It's herbicides, fungicides. There's 3 different categories of things, and they're all on those vegetables, which are affecting the taste of the vegetables. Assuming the farmer is doing it legally and is following all the proper rules, it's still affecting
Yeah.
the vegetable.
Yeah, I'm sure. And also, like, you just don't know over time what secondary impact that could have. And you could probably just do a whole program talking to food and nutrition scientists about the long-term effects of having all these things sprayed on our fruit and veg, but we'll have to leave that for another impact fast. I want to talk
But
about, yeah,
it is, but I just want to toss in, it is relevant to indoor vertical farming. Because we're doing things indoor, we don't use any herbicides, and we don't use any herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides at all. That is common between Zale and all the other people who do the same thing. So it's just
okay.
something to be aware.
So we are ticking the health box, ticking the taste box, which is the most important, of course, or one of the most important things. We're also ticking the environmental box in terms of water usage, cutting down transportation, which you've got statistics behind that and facts and figures behind that, which you
50%,
can back up.
50%, 50%
50%.
of the cost of a vegetable is in the transportation. And
Wow.
over 75% of it is in the production and transportation of GHGs that you actually create.
I particularly want to focus on how your method, how your operating model is different than the ones that have gone out, because vertical farming is not new. It's been done before, so I want to know why you're different. But I kind of just want to focus on the issues that we've got now that we need to think about making better for us, making it more accessible, healthier, reducing our overall carbon footprint.
Okay, so let me take you through what happens today, and then it becomes really obvious what happens in the future. Okay, so in farming, there are 2 core farming models. There's your traditional farmer, Old MacDonald had a farm kind of
Yes.
farmer, and then you also have greenhouses. So they're 2 kind of separate pieces, but we're going to start with the farm, and then we'll talk about, and then I'll show you the difference, and it'll become obvious what the difference is. So in a traditional farm, just like anybody has a back garden, they have to go and they have to dig up the earth. So what happens is some tractors driving along, pop, 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 pop. The diesel is being spent to dig up the ground, and then another tractor comes along and plants the seeds in there. Either they're either pre-grown someplace else and transplanted, or they're seeds planted. Typically with vegetables, they're grown elsewhere and then planted with things like grains and the pulses. There'll be seeds that'll be dropped in there, but that's the second thing. And then you have to water them. So you can rely on the water, or you have a whoomp, 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 like your water fountains just spraying water all over there. And then meanwhile, then the tractor has to go down, and you have to put down the pesticides, and then you have to also add all the nutrition, the fertilizer, what we would call fertilizer. I call it nutrition. So then you have to lay fertilizer, and then 3, 4, 5 months, and you're putting the water out, you're fertilizing, you're putting on the pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, and then you got to run your tractor and harvest all of that stuff. Then you have to harvest it. Remember, as we talked earlier, the second you harvest it, it starts to lose its nutrition. So what they want to do is they want to quickly cool it. If you bring it down to about, I was thinking Fahrenheit, but you want to bring it down to maybe 5 degrees Celsius. So just above freezing, but cool, and it'll stop the delay. You then have to do that. Then you have to package it into big bundles, which is then put into a truck. The truck goes, now we're talking about, let's say, from Portugal, Spain, or in the United States, in North America, from California, Arizona, Mexico. It then needs to be trucked to where it's going. Then it comes to usually a terminal. That terminal then will then spread it and then do local distribution to the stores where Sima gets her food. The only difference between the farm and the greenhouse is that the stuff is grown in trays, and it's a much simpler operation. But because the greenhouse is open to the outside world, all the pesticides, fungicides, herbicides need to be used as well. Okay, and then you have that same trucking, you have the same thing. Well, greenhouses are large. If you see pictures of them in Spain, it's just huge, but they're acres of greenhouses to do this.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Right, and you got to remember, you're selling something that's only worth a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars per kilo. I have to convert from pounds to kilo. Anyway, so I didn't want to say pounds to pounds. Anyway, pounds, euros per kilo, however you want to do it. You need to have your margins are incredibly low for the farmer, and then you have all these other costs that move all the way through the system. Okay, so that's the way things are currently done now. Indoor vertical farming. I'm in London. I'm 10 minutes away from the terminal, 20 minutes away from the terminal. I grow inside a building. Because I'm inside a building, I don't have to use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides, because you get no bugs that come in. Use a positive air pressure and we get rid of the problem. We use electricity for the LED lights, so there's no burning of diesel. Depending on where the electricity comes from, it could be a little bit better.
Yeah.
In UK now, I think the majority of you have no coal burning anymore, and I think the majority of your electricity is generated through either solar or wind, or on the windmills, nuclear. Anyhow, so you're just using electricity. You're harvesting with a pair of scissors. Somebody's just harvesting it, puts it into the package. It's dropped off at the terminal, and it's delivered. So essentially, the day that I harvest it is the day that you're eating it.
Wow.
Right? As opposed to, I think it takes 2 days from Spain or Portugal. In Canada, in where I am, Toronto, or in New York, it's 4 or 5 days, 3 to 4 days from California, Arizona, Mexico. Then it goes to the terminal, and then. So, and the whole product by itself only has 14-day shelf life. So it's kind of, so that's indoor vertical farming versus greenhouses, and the savings there. I warned you about that. So you asked a question which wasn't answered, and I think it's a really critical answer. What makes local grown salads different than in-farm?
Talking about. Yes.
Yeah, in-farm, aero-farm, aero-farms, Plenty, and Bowery. Now, just for the people who don't know, all of those companies raised in the billions of dollars, and they all went bankrupt. So they when you talk about big elephant in the room, there's a big elephant. So Zale, why are you so much better than blah blah blah? So I'm going to answer.
Zale, before we start talking about them, when did the first one start? Like, how long ago did people start thinking about doing these? About a
at least
decade.
at least a decade
About
ago.
10
Yeah.
years ago, and they all
Yeah.
started and they all went bust. And what kind of, where were they? Sort of, was it a global or was it everywhere? And how big were we talking? Tell us a little bit about them and their
Uh,
journeys and what led to
uh,
that, do
uh,
you think?
okay, so I'm not an expert on the journey, so I can just tell you the
Yeah,
big pictures. Infarm was European-based, in Germany and England, and the owners were Germany and England, and they were from Israel, so they were taking some things. But the concept of the Infarm was that they would put, it's called Infarm because they would put the farm right inside the store. So you could
right.
walk into your retailer and you'd be able to do your own harvesting, and
Ah.
it's a just like it. Okay, every one of
Like
these
buy your
guys,
own plot of land, but actually it's not. It's like inside. Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Dumb. The
yeah.
health issues are
No
just
way. Yeah, absolutely no way. That I could
so.
tell you straight off that wouldn't ever really work. Yeah.
So then they
Lovely
transitioned.
idea though. Yes.
Lovely idea, yeah. But then they transitioned to where they would use their technology and just become a regular indoor vertical farming using their very unique technology, and then they would harvest, and all that other sales story was good. So that's what happened, but they went under, and they're in the same category as when I say same technology category. So in farm, you have to imagine is like these big units. You walk in, and there are trays, and there are lights above the trays, and the stuff grows and moves to the lights. So that's the core of what it looks like. Okay. So in farmers like that, Bowery, same concept. They grow, but Bowery was bigger trays, a different type, but essentially the same technology, but just done slightly differently. Both of these are hydroponic, meaning that the roots are sitting in water. And when you think about indoor vertical farming, a lot of times you think about, when you read about it, it's always considered in water in hydroponic. Hydroponic conceptually makes a lot, is okay, but it's got a whole bunch of problems, which we can talk about later, because we're not hydroponic. We put our roots, when it says hydroponics, it's referring to where the plant roots are sitting. They're sitting in water. The water has a nutrient fertilizer in it, and it flows back and forth. And that's how it works.
So that it doesn't turn into a pond effectively.
Right. It doesn't turn into a pond. I mean, it's very shallow, right? The water.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And,
But still, you still
yeah,
need that fresh
fresh
circular.
water.
Yeah.
Okay, and because remember I talked about the putting oxygen into water right at the beginning.
Helps them grow more.
It
Yes.
helps them grow. If the water sits stable, all the oxygen will disappear, and the plant will suck out all the oxygen. So it won't be any. So that's in farm, and that's the technology. Bowery is essentially the same concept, different types of physical technology to do the water, but it's essentially the same thing. And the third one is a company called AeroFarms. Now, AeroFarms is a little different in that their roots were being sprayed with the nutrient. It was like a mist. Okay, you know how like women spray their skin,
Yes,
right?
like for the skin.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. And that's how all three technologies are really dumb. Like anybody who actually sat and thought about it. Now, these guys who were involved were very smart, but I don't know how they missed it. Now I'm going to get really nerdy, but essentially there's a thing. Okay, so just
Nerd alert is on. Go for it.
Okay, all right.
Tell me, I really want to know.
Really, it's a distance squared law. The distance from the light. What happens is when light it comes out of the lamps, the LED, the energy dissipates by the distance squared. So that means, let's just practically, if I have a plant and the plant needs X amount of energy, 100 units of energy, right? And the lamps are, and I set my lamps and I have enough brightness and it's at 12 inches. If I go to 24 inches, I need 400. I have to put out 400 units of energy as opposed to the 100. So the distance squared, it goes up by the distance squared. The higher the lights are from the canopy of the plants, canopy is the top of the plants, the more energy you need. So, but the problem is, the higher you go, the more energy you need, which means that if you want to grow tomatoes, which are a big plant, you want to grow any of the herbs, which are big plants, anything else, if you have your plant and then you have your lights and your plant grows to your lights, you have to move your lights. But because you have stacked system, you can't do that. So the only thing you can grow are very small plants, which are lettuces, which means that essentially you're selling a commodity item, which I mean, yeah, it tastes better. It's all those wonderful things, but who's going to pay twice the price for it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So those three companies all have that same core problem, and they can't get around that problem unless you have
So you
moving
basically
light.
end up with a lettuce farm.
Exactly, and nobody's
Yeah.
going to pay the price. Now, the other company is a company called Plenty, and Plenty does like we do. They grow vertically, right? So, and you can put your lights in front of them, and you just move your lights out of the way as the plant grows. So you have the choice of growing many, many, many different things. But the
Almost like a
problem,
sliding door.
the sliding door is how you get the lights out of the way. No,
Yeah,
it pulls it away.
just pulls it away. Yeah.
Just goes away, right? You just pull it away. It's very easy to do. You don't have to move
Yeah.
anything. It's very simple to do, which is great. But then what happens is Plenty made a mistake. Plenty, instead of having simple towers, they have 20-foot high towers. And when you have 20-foot high towers, you can't have somebody physically do anything. Remember, I mentioned I have somebody who goes to harvest. We only have 8-foot high towers. So I
Yeah.
can have somebody reach up and they can harvest the whole thing. Plenty's towers were so big and so large, they had to create all this automation. And they
Yeah.
spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on all of this really cool automation. You can watch the videos. It's very cool,
Really
but
impressive. Yeah, but
it doesn't.
a nightmare to run. It's just not practical, is it?
Right. So
Yeah.
all these companies, they all understood. Remember, let's go right back to the beginning of our conversation. We
Yeah.
said I talked about all the greatness of an indoor vertical farming, and then they just ruined it because they're first of all, they weren't selling products that people want. And we have to get into the at some point. You might want to say, Zale, tell me a little bit about the different types of products and how they're valued and stuff like that. But essentially, those three in-farm, aero farms, and Bowery were only selling lettuces and the odd other kind of thing, but they couldn't make any money at it. And Zipgrow, or sorry, Plenty, which grew out of a company called Zipgrow, had this tower concept, which is really good, except they screwed it up because they spent billions or hundreds of millions of dollars on technology that would never work. And then all of a sudden, you're again selling a product that sells for only a few euros per kilo, or dollars per, whatever you want to use.
Yeah. The investment
Right?
cost outweighs the return. Yeah.
Yeah. So we then call it the capex and the opex. So
Mm.
you have your capex, which is extremely high, and your opex is just way too high.
Mm.
We didn't take those approaches at all. We from the day one when I started, because of just my background and everything else, I was always thinking about the capex and the opex. If I spend, I'll make the capex really easy to understand. If these guys are spending $30 million on a farm, that's kind of the numbers they were talking about per farm. $50 million is the one that was just built for 50 million in the States. Same stacked idea. And you're selling 1 million pounds of product. That means your cost per and you do spread it over 5 years. So you take the 30 million by 5, it's 6 million a year. Selling, you have to add $6 a pound just to break even.
Yeah.
Right? Just to pay your capex back in over 5 years. It makes no business sense.
It's not economically, it's not viable. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that's why that's their story. And that's a very common story in the indoor vertical farming. There are a lot of people who are making money in indoor vertical farming who keep their stuff very small, and they're single type operators. They're, Susie, who builds this farm, buys all the equipment, buys trays, and can make money selling locally to restaurants and stuff that are local. I don't think that way. I'm one of those guys who say that if you want to make a money, if you have a little cup, and I believe that the world has a money pipe, and the money's just flowing out. There's money everywhere, everywhere. And if you hold a little cup, you can't make very much money. And these people are working very hard. They're working very hard, and they hold a cup, and the money's flowing, but most of it flowing out of their cup. Yeah. I'd like to take a really big bucket and collect the money away. So the only way to make really big money in indoor vertical farming is you have to address all of these issues. And so conceptually, we looked at from day one, I was looking at the energy costs. How can I minimize my energy costs? Essentially, I turned it into what's my yield per kilowatt hour, right? By looking at the yield per kilowatt hour and say, how do I keep that as low as possible? Which means I have to increase my yield, right? Because electricity is going to be electricity. Maybe I can save a few pennies per kilowatt hour, but I have to increase the yield. And I looked at everything possible that would increase the yield, which means essentially just go back to the lights, right? That's the biggest cost. The lights, I keep them as close to the plant as possible. And I only, as the plant grows, I move the lights away.
Move the lights away. Yeah.
So we're very, very energy efficient. And then instead of spending $1 zillion on fancy harvesting equipment, I'll pay somebody a good wage, but let them use scissors and let them cut them to the exact size that the customer wants them. So they're cut and harvested in one thing into a bucket and they're ready to go. We still have, because of health concerns and everything else, we still have to wash and do the rinsing, but essentially we reduce all of the costs involved.
Let's dive deeper into the solution and let's talk about a virtual farm for now.
Okay.
And how you kind of see that happening in practice. But if you could talk me through the real estate and what you're looking for as ideal, and then how you would then look to finance the entire investment.
Okay. All right. So I understand your question and I understand where you want me to get to. So let's just kind of back up and think about our poor audience who's very confused already because of the distance square law. So we're gonna throw some other things at them. Another concept,
do it.
which is called brownfield sites. So
yeah.
the concept of a brownfield has a lot of different meanings. I'm sure there's some for official meaning, but practically it's a building that was built and is not useful anymore. So think about a manufacturing building that was built in the 1940s, right? So it would have lots of big columns in the middle of the row. The heights would be 12 to 14 feet, and they were great at the time. There's tremendous amounts of concrete that was built into these buildings, and they're sitting there. And in North America, we would think of Detroit, right? The early 1900s with the car manufacturing. Certain parts of England, I would assume, would include things like the armaments building for the Second World War, right?
Yes.
A lot of buildings building there. And then in Germany, you think of East Germany and Soviet style buildings that were sitting out there. And it turns out Italy has this problem. Everybody has these problems. So
yeah, we've got loads of like warehouses and sewing mills dotted around everywhere in the UK.
Right. And they're all sitting, and they're not useful as now because people have needs that are very higher. A typical building, if you build it now, will have a 30-foot clearance to the top, won't have any columns in the middle of the building. There won't be anything. And so you can have your machinery and lay it all up. So you have all these buildings that are essentially sitting empty and doing nothing. And they have a lot of concrete in them and a lot of steel. And the buildings, we call it the bones of the building. They're solid. There's nothing wrong with the building itself. The floors are solid. Everything is solid.
Good foundations. Yeah.
Good foundations, but they need new windows. Maybe the roof is dilapidated. Maybe the roof has fallen in. I mean, I've walked through lots of these buildings. But putting on a new roof and putting in windows is not that expensive relatively. And the saving, if you were to build, sorry, I'm thinking three topics at once, so I have to slow down. So that's the problem. That's the building, and to renovate the building are good, but to renovate the building for Amazon warehouse makes no sense because Amazon can't make use of it. Most modern manufacturing can't use it. Some of these buildings are turned into lofts for houses and stuff like that, and homes and people like that. But you can't have lofts.
It's limited, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, but indoor vertical farming, our technology can fit in a building with a 12, what we call a 12-foot ceiling, meaning that the lowest part on the ceiling is 12 foot. We can work around those pillars, and we can all of a sudden make these old factories into modern, production facilities. We're growing food in them, essentially making them into farms, and all of a sudden they have a lot of value, right? Because
you're putting the value back in the real estate because you're essentially, for very little money, you're repurposing those buildings.
Exactly. And
then you're generating profit from them. And
we're also so I just want to, there's a couple of things before we move on.
Please do.
Right. The building itself has all that concrete and everything else in it. If you were to, let's say the building was okay, the location was okay, but the building was sitting there, you'd have to destroy the building. You have to put all the building into landfill. You basically the GHGs that were wasted are totally wasted. And to replace a building, put a new building up there, is a whole bunch more GHGs. So the construction industry is one of the biggest users of GHGs and
Absolutely.
concrete.
One of the biggest polluters, yeah.
So by reusing this building, we've solved a whole bunch of those problems, right? We've created jobs because sometimes a lot of these buildings tend to be in poorer neighborhoods or poorer places, right? People who don't have jobs. People live there because there used to be factories. There are no factories now, there are no jobs. So we're basically creating a factory in there. So that's the kind of social benefit that we're offering. The financial, remember, everything I have to do has to make money. It has to make money, financial sense. So now all of a sudden we made this piece of property into a valid property, right? It's producing income. The farm itself becomes a tenant in the building. And so we have the building who's earning income because the building is getting rent from the vertical farm. I keep them as two separate entities. And the farm, of course, is making money. So now we have buildings and we have farms, and we spin the whole thing up and we put it into what's called an SPV, single purpose vehicle, which owns the buildings and the businesses in it. Then exit strategy, because the first thing you ask is, we could take all the buildings, put them together. Does England have REITs? We have REITs in North America, right?
Yes,
Real estate,
we
right?
do
So
have
all
REITs. Yeah.
Right. So
Package
the
them up.
REIT, right? They get packaged up. In North America, a REIT can't own the operating business. That's why I kept the business separate. So we can then scoop up all the operating businesses, and they become a separate entity. And these buildings and if the building ever has better value than the indoor vertical farm, kick out the indoor vertical farm. It finds a new building. And
Absolutely. Sell that and make the profit on that. And like you said, it can get repurposed again. As long as you're making your profit, you don't have the need to sell. But if you did, then that should still, that's still a good exit, essentially. And absolutely. And also just keeping that segregation between the owner of the land versus the operator, versus whoever's actually doing the work on site is what I would expect, and it's pretty standard. So it's the epitome of the green financing model. But you're about to tell me more. You're about to put the cherry on top.
I'm gonna put a cherry on top. Yeah. So we talked about brownfield sites. So brownfield site usually is referring to a piece of property that is so bad because of whatever industry was previously there that you can't actually do anything there. But what we can do is use a prefab building, put down a 12-inch or 16-inch piece of concrete over the bad stuff coming out of the ground. So we don't disturb the ground. We don't have to regenerate it. We put a slab down. We put a pre-purposed building that fits our indoor vertical farm perfectly. Very simple to put up. They can be put up in 6 months. And all of a sudden, bad property is now generating income from the food that we're selling. We just need to make sure that all the vapors and everything else is like sealed off. But that's what the concrete does, right? And so all of a sudden, instead of digging up and cleaning out all the dirt and
no digging, no land, no transporting to throw in a landfill anyway. And it's a bit like a patchwork quilt, isn't it? You're taking what you can and making it into something useful. So that's one example, the brownfield site.
Yeah. And that's
the key one, opportunistic.
It's opportunistic. Yeah. So wherever there are, now the only thing, not the only thing, but one thing that's critical for indoor vertical farming is you want to be close to where the people live. So you want to be in older, in big cities. It always makes more sense in big cities because you got to sell the products and everything else like that. So it's kind of, you don't want to do this out in the middle of nowhere where it's
out. Yeah, absolutely. But there's no shortage of places on the outskirts of London, Birmingham, Oxford, Liverpool, Newcastle, Manchester, all these places. There's no shortage of places like that on the outskirts.
So that's the overall business model, I think.
And in smaller countries, it's less of a problem. If driving from one end to the other is going to take 5 hours, then pretty much anywhere is close by, right?
Right. Well, we actually like to be within 2 hours of where our population center is. So because remember, I want you to be able to if it's 5 hours and I harvest in the morning, you're not going to have it for supper because by 5 hours to the terminal and by the terminal to you.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
if I do it 2 hours, you'll be able to eat food that was harvested the same day.
So literally you're serving a massive population within a couple of hours, and hence the name locally grown salad. It's all starting to make more sense. I want to talk about the employment opportunities. That's one thing that I think is really important, especially nowadays. The first thing people will think is, oh yeah, that's it. This is another technological tool that's just going to cut out. Yeah. Um,
all,
so,
all,
you know,
all,
how,
all our employees, they need to be able to just work in a factory type. I don't know
yeah,
how to say it because I'm not
yeah,
from it. They
skilled
definitely do
skilled
not
and
need
not
a.
and less skilled labor. And do you know what? This is the other thing one of the things that you said is that it's like I think you described it as it's like a McDonald's model, is in the process is the same. So wherever you set up, you're not having to like train people in anything different for each place. It's A, B, C, end to end. And so you're
Exactly.
just replicating that model every
Yeah.
time. And so it's easy to employ. I mean, what a typical size farm would be, how many
About
people would it?
about 20 to 30
Okay,
employees full time, and be around
that's really good.
20,000 square feet, and that will
20,000 square feet, 20 to 30 people full time.
right, right, and then depending on where you are, we'll just replicate the farm over and over and over again, right?
Mm,
So if you have,
mm.
we're looking at a place in Windsor, Ontario, in Canada, and there's an old Chrysler factory that's sitting empty, and it's hundreds of thousands of square feet, right?
Mm,
And we could slowly populate it because there's Windsor, which is across the river from us, which is about a 3 to 4 million population. Plus there's Windsor, which is another 500,000 population. So it's the opportunity is to grow and grow and grow. And instead of shipping the stuff from California or Mexico,
yeah,
even the Canadian one,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's empowering communities. And this is what I think impact investment is all about. The more people I talk to, the more I see this kind of common theme where you want to make money, but you want to leave a good legacy behind. You
mhm,
want to tackle environmental issues. Yes, you are about innovation, but you're not blinded by technology. You kind of look
right,
outside the box. And most importantly, you want to focus on the social element of your product or service offering,
right.
because ultimately, if we don't think about it that way, it's not going to be sustainable.
We will always find a solution to every problem we have. Doesn't mean that there won't be problems now and everything else, but there's this big climate issue and it exists and it's real and it's huge. But meanwhile, there are $5 billion a week in green bonds that are being tossed at the problem of climate change. We are going to solve the problem. It exists. It is a problem, and I don't, just because I'm religious, I believe that the problem will be solved. Doesn't mean I don't have to do anything, but we will
Agreed.
solve it. We will
Yes.
solve it, and
Yes.
that's what's critical in my thinking is we're going to solve it, and the money's there, and people are aware of it, and there's going to be a lot of money made in climate change. It's a new industrial revolution. There's going to be, like,
A
right now,
hundred
money,
percent.
it's only in, the most of the stuff is just being thrown at wind and is being thrown at solar, right? But guys like me are in that same category. We're
Yeah.
addressing all of these issues, and there are tons of people around like me doing the exact same thing, solving one problem, another problem. Elon Musk solved with ignoring who he is and everything else. He solved the electrical car problem. He proved it could be done,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, a global scale for sure. There's no
Right.
doubt about that. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about that. But I feel like you guys have to fight your corner that a little bit more, because I think there can be quite a lot of frenzy and the money gets pushed towards a specific problem that needs to be solved that's based on theories of what might
Right.
happen in 20 or 30 years from now. And I'm not, as it's like, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that and we shouldn't be aware of that, But I also think that, the guys who are really fighting their corner are the ones that have got the most immediate, cost-effective, obvious solution available. And I just don't understand why people are not jumping
because
on that kind of thing.
it's hard. I'll give you an example of a very large problem that exists in the world that I'm solving, right? I'm part of the solution. So 15% of the, 15% of the world's natural gas is spent creating nitrogen, which is creating fertilizer.
Fertilizer,
Okay.
yes.
You burn natural gas, it creates nitrogen. Most plants need tremendous amounts of nitrogen. Okay, I'm getting into that nerdy thing, but but it's really worth following along. Okay, and then what happens is this fertilizer gets put onto plants in the farmland, and 66% of that fertilizer is lost. It's washed away because of rain and a whole bunch of other reasons. So essentially, so if you go to 15%, you take the 66%, which is 10%. 10% of the world's natural gas is burnt every year, and no value comes from it. Zero value, because the 15% is used to make fertilizer. 10% of that fertilizer is never actually gone into a plant. It gets washed away. It gets and it creates all sorts of problems. The algae blooms, that's from nitrogen going into the water with phosphorus and whatever. Okay, but so solving the nitrogen problem, indoor vertical farming, we solve that nitrogen because I never waste any of my nutrients because it just recycles and recycles and recycles. It's never wasted because the natural process allows it to be wasted. So that's an example of my business will cut down the burning of natural gas, which will cut down, and we can go on and on.
I love that. It's stuff. It's you've got all these measurable objectives, and that you can show the statistics for, and then you could go a step further and look at everything that you're indirectly doing as well. And so it's the ripple effect, the domino effect of everything that you're doing. And again, another reason why people are not just jumping on it. Like, I wish we could just see more of that. What do you think we can do to really get it out there, apart from talking on the podcast and appealing to our audience of entrepreneurs and investors out there? Like, what do you think is the greatest challenge of getting these solutions invested in? And where do you think the future?
Perseverance, right? It's really perseverance. I've been at this. I don't want to tell you how many years I've been at it and how hard it's been personally. But it's perseverance. It's all about perseverance. It's just keep going at it, keep going. Once you've got the solution, just telling the story as much as you possibly can to other people.
Yeah.
All right. But
keep getting a message out there.
Getting the message out. That's my thing. And I think everybody else who's got some point solution for climate change has got to do the exact same thing. Right. And I think it's going to be small changes. Like, let's say I'm tremendously successful and we roll out 500 indoor vertical farms. Your life won't be any different. The only difference between what you'll see if my vertical farms is all of a sudden you'll have a wider selection of vegetables and they'll taste better. Right. But it doesn't require you to change in anything you're doing. Because of our business model, we go to the local distributors. They don't disappear. The only people who are going to suffer are the farmers that are selling stuff and exporting it, right, which is hard on them. And the guys who are shipping stuff from Spain, Portugal to the UK. All of those people will have to find something else to do with their equipment, their ships, and their stuff.
Yeah, but I think also at the same time, then there'll be potentially a focus for, because you're not offering a solution. Like, vertical farming is not for every single fruit and veg. So you're limiting your market, and I just don't know how profitable exporting that kind of stuff into another country necessarily is.
Oh, like tremendously. Right now, France gets all its gets a lot of its basil from Africa. Right? Like is
it really necessary? I don't, I think when things like that happen, you are still creating opportunities, and the costs of creating those opportunities locally far outweigh any losses.
Right.
I'm very careful what to say, because obviously If that's your bread and butter, and all of a sudden says, well, there's no need for that anymore. But there's the
but
potential to be recreative within your own
right,
geographical area and focus on the things that do make sense for you.
right. Well, they could be like right now. Like, I like to talk about Africa. Africa's like Africa is really the future,
It
right?
is,
And
yeah.
there's tremendous opportunities. People don't realize like countries like Nigeria have 300 million people, and they import all their food. They don't currently grow it. They used to be self-sustaining for food, and then what happens is the oil hits. Everybody moved into the oil and oil processing and everything else, and people left the farms. And so there's tremendous opportunities everywhere.
Yeah.
Where I think they'll move to is the people who are growing basil in northern Africa. They'll turn to making pesto. They'll make a higher value product, right? They can grow.
Yeah.
They'll just people. Entrepreneurs will adjust
Well,
and they'll
yeah, because
find
pine
opportunity.
nuts are not available in Europe. So
Right.
if you grow good basil and you have pine nuts and you have extra virgin olive oil, then you can make the best pesto. And then, as you say, this was the point actually. We're thinking along the same lines. It's finding opportunities to reinvent yourself based on something that is actually more efficient for you to do economically,
Exactly.
the type of land that you have, the crops that grow, the weather conditions, unless instead of just being a jack of all trades and a master of none,
Right.
and working uneconomically. I love what you're all about. Um, what does the future hold? Where do you see this in sort of like, say, 1 to 5 years time for you, for
So
local grown
so
salads and your team, and how you want to take it forward?
so Zale has really planned, thinks this out right away. So right now, in the short term, we're looking for an investment to get up a first big scale farm. We proved out the technology in small scale farms, proved the market fit, product, all the technology
Prototypes,
pieces of
tick, tick, tick. Yeah.
all done. So we want to scale it out to a 20,000 square foot farm, and we're looking for investment for that. So that would be an equity investment. Then once we get that farm going, we want to grow very rapidly. So we're going to do a $100 million green bond financing of that, because we never really talked about the infrastructure part of it, but we're really an infrastructure play, and green bonds are a great infrastructure play. So the green bond brings in enough money, for anywhere from 15 to 20 indoor vertical farms. It'll pay for the property, it'll pay for the equipment. We get those up and running, and then we just rinse and repeat every year, just expand. Our current plan is we tell the world it's about 200 farms, but I've identified, 50 cities, and every one of those cities can have 20 to 30 farms. So there is really no limit to what we can do. Food is one of the biggest markets in the world. We're talking trillions of dollars around the world. We focus in on we didn't really talk about what we do, but we focus in only on those microgreens, herbs, leafy greens, and small vegetables. And we don't grow tomatoes. We do grow tomatoes, but we do grow cherry tomatoes. We don't grow beefsteak tomatoes. Does not make sense in our technology.
The cherry tomatoes are more popular anyway, and they taste better.
Yeah, but beefsteak tomatoes are used for tomato paste and are used in manufacturing, right? So there's the market is massive.
Yeah, that's it. Everyone can have a slice of that pie.
Exactly. There's all a fit. Anyways, so we're looking minimum 200 farms, but probably more. And as soon, just a matter of financing the rolling out. Ray Kroc in the 1950s, without the internet, without fax machines, without cell machines, rolled out 200 McDonald's in 2 years. So I would love to be able to do the same thing as Ray Kroc.
Here, I wish that for you. You certainly deserve it. And you know what? I don't think we need cell phones, internet, or any. I mean, we're fully utilizing now, but I think we just, like you say, just keep getting the message out there, keep talking to like-minded people. And yeah, hopefully we will see 200 farms rolling out in no time. Zale, it's
Thank
been
you.
so lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for bestowing your knowledge on me. I've learned so much about vertical farming and then some today. And I really look forward to collaborating with you in the future. And I wish you all the success. You really deserve it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. I look forward to working with you. This will be great. We could,
Awesome.
instead of doing it over the internet, we could do it face
We
to
could do it
face.
in person. Yes,
Yes.
that would be really nice.